Hello, everyone, and welcome to what I think will be an important and fun conversation. I want to tell you why I feel so strongly about this, and then I will introduce my esteemed guest. We are recording this in October of 2022, and America is very divided and becoming increasingly more so. Throughout human history, various marginalized groups have been demonized and blamed for all kinds of ills in society, usually with tragic results. And I've been seeing many otherwise compassionate people falling for the anti-trans propaganda. And when I think about why this is and what we can do about it, I realize that it's much easier to hate in the abstract. And most people don't know and love anyone who identifies as trans or non-binary. And so once you have met someone who is in this category, you might even want to stand up for them once you know them and hear their story. So I want to introduce the world to my wonderful guest here today, so that after this conversation, all of America, or whatever portion of it listens to this, will have a friend who they like, who they know, who they care about, who is trans. And I met Tony Ferraiolo several years ago when I get this email out of the blue. I was offering a mindfulness teacher training at the time, and people would email me sometimes questions, which I always welcomed. And Tony was interested and said, "Hey, can we hop on a phone call?" And I said, "Of course." So we scheduled a phone call. And I hadn't seen Tony, didn't know who he was in the world, or didn't know or care about his gender. None of that was relevant. But after this conversation, I came away from it feeling like, wow, this is just a really special human. I felt so much kindness and warmth and openness and humor. And so Tony went on to sign up for the training, which, lucky me, I got to know him over the next couple of months and learn about the beautiful and really important work he is doing in the world as a coach and a speaker and an advocate for transgender youth. So to tell you just a little bit about Tony's many accomplishments before I turn this over to him. Tony talks to medical providers to promote competent and respectful healthcare for the transgender community. He trains educators on providing a safe space for transgender kids in school. He has started support groups for transgender youth and their families, and they've served over 1,000 families. He's been a contributing author for articles in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry called 10 Things Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Youth Want Their Doctors to Know. He also contributed to the publication Pediatric Gender Identity, Overview and Terminology. And he was a contributing author for The Real Lives of Transgender and Non-Binary Humans. He's the subject of a documentary, an award-winning documentary, which I have seen and highly recommend, called A Self-Made Man. And he's an author of the book series called Artistic Expressions of Transgender Youth. Have this book and also highly recommend it. He hosted the A&E miniseries, Transitioning, where he coached 3 transgender young adults. And he's the co-founder of the Jim Collins Foundation, a nonprofit that provides financial assistance to transgender people. He's the director of Health Care Advocates International's LGBTQ+ youth and family program. He's provided training to over 70,000 people around the country. He is a mindfulness teacher. He is, in my opinion, a walking, breathing embodiment of kindness. And I am thrilled to welcome Tony here today for this conversation. Tony, thank you for making the time.
Thank you for having me. Oh my God, anytime I'm in your presence, I just feel so relaxed and so safe. So I was really happy to be able to take space with you today and hopefully, just educate some people who might not understand, or like you said, maybe never met a trans person. So now you did. So let's see what happens.
Hey, thank you for being here. And if you're willing, just would love to hear a little bit about you and your amazing life.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm actually right now in the process of writing my life story. I was asked by a publisher to do that. And you got me at the right time because I've been going back in time and visiting, a childhood that I wish no child would ever experience. And this is one of the reasons why I do the work I do with trans kids, right? So, when I was younger, there was nobody talking about transgender. People barely talked about, lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. So I was really a kid that was suffering. And besides struggling with my gender identity, I was being, verbally abused by my father and neglected by my mother. My neighbor was sexually abusing me. I performed self-harm and suicidal ideations and a suicide attempt. And it wasn't until much later on in life that I realized that I was trans. I lived in the lesbian community for many, many years because people were telling me that I was female and I didn't know any different. And I knew that I was attracted to females. So I was like, okay, I'm a lesbian, right? But I wasn't a good lesbian, all right? Because I was like, it was like, I was watching people who looked like me, butch lesbians, but they were comfortable with their bodies. I was not. I wasn't. I would come home from events that I would go to, and then I became a club promoter, and I would throw these huge parties, dance parties, and everybody was laughing and having a good time, and I would go home and cry because I didn't feel like I didn't know where I belonged. I started a band, a lesbian band called Vertical Smile, Badoom Boots, and the lead singer came over my house one night. I was about 30. I was almost 40. I don't even think I was 40 yet. And she says, it's trans night. And I was like, what is she talking about? What is she talking about? And she put in this documentary called Gender Knots. And it was a documentary about trans people. And there was a scene where there was these three guys walking on the beach, and one guy unbuttoned his shirt and said, hey, check it out, I got my top surgery. And I was like, oh my God, I'm trans. Like, it just hit me. Crazy, crazy. Everything made sense. Everything that I struggled with made sense. So I was like, wow, that's cool. And then I started thinking about trans people. And the only thing I knew about trans people was that they were not being treated right. They were being murdered. They were being thrown out of their homes. They were homeless. And I remember saying to myself, if I was so unhappy being a lesbian, how would I ever be happy being a trans person? So I went to a beach to kill myself. I went to that beach, all intentions that day to end my life. I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to live the way I was living anymore. I was so unhappy, so angry. I was such an angry person. I mean, people that meet me now, they're like, no way. Yeah, I was filled with sadness and fear. And as you know, that creates anger. And I was angry. And when I was on the beach, I remember crying so much that like I couldn't even see the water. I was really in a bad place. I was like below bottom. Something inside of me said, stop, create yourself. Stop, create yourself. And I was like, oh my God, I can't, like in a second, I was like, I do have the power to create the person I've always wanted to be. I can do this. I can do this. So I started thinking about what would Tony look like, right? He'd be tattooed, goatee, artsy looking guy. So I wanted to visualize myself as a male. But then I went deeper. I was like, what is he going to feel like, right? I wanted to be happy. But I also said this, it was really cool because it happened a couple years later. When I stand in front of somebody, I want my energy to make them smile, that I don't have to say a word to them, that being in my presence will bring loving kindness to somebody, just being in my presence. So I baby stepped in for about a year. And then I got my top surgery. And when I had my top surgery, I had, a male chest, conquered, like a surgeon. For people that don't know what top surgery is, it's not a mastectomy. We don't want to say that. It's gender affirming top surgery for trans men. And I needed that. And I was a big boy. I didn't even, some trans guys bind, they use binders, which is like a t-shirt type of thing that holds your chest in. I was so big, I couldn't bind anything. So after that surgery, this is how I explain it to people. Before transitioning, every night I had to make a decision whether I wanted to live the next day. And then after transition, I can't wait until tomorrow. And I remember thinking to myself on the way home from the hospital after top surgery, there has to be kids out there that if I didn't know any trans people before I transitioned, they can't know any trans people. So in 2008, I started support groups for kids. I was the only one doing the work in Connecticut. And I think I'm one of the first that have worked with young kids. I'm talking, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, but teenagers also. And that's where I landed. So like everybody's like, how do you help these children everybody thinks, you know who Caesar Milan is, the dog whisperer. A lot of people know who the dog whisperer. People think I'm the kid whisperer. I'm not the kid whisperer. When I have a child sitting in front of me that's in distress, I tell them what I needed to hear when I was their age, but there was nobody there to tell me. You know, so that's where I got where I am today. That since 2008, I've been working with trans and non-binary kids and their families. When parents can't understand things and they come to me in tears, it's tears of fear. And I know that because I've seen that for years. So it's up to me with kindness and no judgment to try to bring them where their child needs them to be. And I'm going to be honest, like when I signed up for your class, and I remember you said, I remember the first lesson. I tell this story all the time, so I can tell it to your audience, which I'm super excited about. I remember you saying something like to the class, for the next week, I want you to be mindful of how much you're not mindful. Do you remember saying something like that, to that effect?
Not precisely.
Yeah. And I remember really doing, because it was something, every time you gave us a situation, I would experience that in real life. If you don't remember that, everything you taught us, I would experience that next week in real life. But anyway, I realized that I was always living, always in the past or in the future. But then when I started practicing mindfulness, I had such a hard time with it. And I started saying to myself, why is this so hard? I know it's hard for people. But then I realized that up until that moment, being in the moment wasn't safe for me. When I was growing up and I was in the woods cutting myself and doing self-harm, and I couldn't be in the moment. If I stayed in the moment from the first time I was abused by my father, which was probably 5 years old, so the time I was stopped being sexually abused was probably like 20 something years old. If I stayed in the moment, I would have ended my life. I had to not stay in the moment. And when I'm working and I'm teaching mindfulness now, when I'm working with my community, especially, because that's what I love to do, is work with the trans and non-binary LGBTQ plus community for no cost, because this is a gift, right? I can't sell a gift. I have to give a gift away. I'm very mindful that sometimes they're very uncomfortable being in the moment, you know.
And that's an important reminder for all of us in the mindfulness community to consider being trauma informed and all of that, and not kind of whitewashing our ability to be in the present moment, which for many of us is a privilege. Yeah. But to circle back, Tony, to when you were growing up, and we now in this culture have these gender normative ideas about how, well, there's just two genders. And of course, there's boys and there's girls. And how early in your life do you think you knew that you didn't fit into one of those two categories as neatly as some people do?
Very early. It's actually in the documentary. I remember this exactly. And a lot of people say to me, well, how can you remember? How do trans and non-binary people know who they are? Well, everybody knows who they are. And right around the ages of 4 and 5, every human starts identifying with their gender identity. The reason why I knew and I remember it is because I was told I was something I didn't think I was. Mm-hmm. And this is what happened. I was outside playing football with my brother. I was about 5, 6 years old. He took his shirt off. I took my shirt off. My Italian mother comes outside screaming, get inside. Only boys take their shirts off. And I said, I am a boy. And she was like, no, you're not. You're a girl. And I thought she was lying to me. Because our gender identity lives in our brain. And a lot of times people think that our genitalia is attached to our gender identity, and it's not. And the way I explain it to children and to sometimes when I'm training adults is when somebody's born, a stranger looks at their body and they guess what their gender identity is going to be. And then when that baby gets old enough, they tell the adults if they guessed right or not. Because if you were born with the sex assigned at birth as male and you identify as male, and just say, God forbid, you were in a car accident or had cancer and they had to remove your penis. It happens. We all know that happens. Would that guy wake up from the surgery being a woman? Would they wake up from that surgery not being any gender? Of course not. They would still be male because your gender identity lives in your brain, right? So the reason why trans people know, it was and most you'll talk to people that be like, oh, I was 5, I was 6, and then I suppressed it because I was shamed.
There's a lot of people who are saying that, well, these kids are just confused. They're confused and they need support. What do you say to those people and those arguments?
Yeah. What I say to those people in those arguments is that they're not sitting with 8-year-olds and are in psych hospitals because they just tried to end their life. Okay. And it's not because they're trans or non-binary. It's because everybody around them is telling them they're not. Hmm. So this is what I know. This is what I know as an adult. As an adult. I think it's our responsibility to help children down a path of happiness, period. And the biggest emotional damaging roadblock for any LGBTQ plus kid is when they're loved and honored before they come out and they're not loved and honored after they come out. Okay. You have people saying that we're mutilating we're mutilating kids' bodies and blockers, and what are you doing? Let me just say something about puberty blockers. And I'm sure you know this, but they've been used on cisgender, non-trans kids since the 1980s. They didn't make these blockers for these trans kids. What they realized was when transgender kids start going through puberty, self-harm and suicidal ideation skyrocket. There was a recent Trevor Project survey, and it's 48% of LGBT kids have reported cutting or self-harm. 60% of trans and non-binary kids reported having, doing self-harm. Now, the definition of self-harm is when you purposely hurt yourself. A lot of people think self-harm is cutting. So I can tell you that the kids that I've worked with, 95% have cut at least once. And when somebody's doing self-harm and we find out about it, anybody out there that might be having a client or has a kid that's, we can't shame them for that, because self-harm is survival, right? What we could do is say something like, I see you're suffering. How can I help you? As somebody who did self-harm for years, I was yelled at for doing it. I was shamed for doing it. Nobody said, what they said was, what's wrong with that guy? What's wrong with that kid? That's what they said. Instead of saying, what happened to them? What's happening to them? Mm-hmm. And that's something we have to remember, that children are children and nobody's mutilating anybody's body. It's not like these kids are walking into hospitals saying, hey, this is what I need. There's health providers, there's their parents, there's behavioral health providers. It's a team of people that sit down and say, what is the best for this child? And what we want to do is we want to keep them alive. We want to keep them alive.
Yeah. And honestly, I've never heard of a child. I'm sure it happens, but it must be very rare for a child, someone under the age of 18, to be having surgery like this. Is that true or no?
Well, no. Typically it depends on the surgery, right? So genital surgery, nobody's touching anybody under 18, 21 or whatever. And for that surgery, typically most insurance companies will ask for 2 letters from a therapist and a psychiatrist. Okay. But top surgery for trans boys, they're doing it as young as 15. Some kids won't make it until 18. They won't make it. And it's a very, very sad thing. They know, and we know when. Listen, I'm a certified life coach, and I coach trans and non-binary kids and their families. I've been doing it for over 10 years. I don't write a letter every time I see a kid and they say, oh, I need top surgery. Sometimes they're not ready emotionally. Like they're not mature enough to take care of themselves afterwards. It has nothing to do with if they're trans or not. That's not that. I never ran into that situation.
Yeah. So these sound bites that we hear about kids getting mutilated, it's another example. It sounds to me like people trying to weaponize a narrative to move people in a certain direction, and maybe trying to put politics in an exam room in a therapist's office. And so if a kid is to move towards top surgery, it's been very carefully vetted, and it's got medical and psychological and familial approval, and everyone who is best positioned to know the intimate details of this situation has decided that this is what's best for this person. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Some parents struggle, of course, because any surgery is like, let's say, hey, listen, it's a big decision. I had a kid I was working with, 15 years old, really struggling, needed top surgery for sure. Parents got on a call with me, and the mother was like, we're going to wait until he has to make this decision. We're going to wait until he's 18 because it's really permanent. I said, so is suicide. Hmm. So is suicide. Kid's been in the hospital 3 times. I said, let me ask you something. If your son was a cisgender boy and he had, what's that condition where boys get breasts? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Gynecomastia.
Yeah, thank you. I can never say that word. And that condition was causing your son to be depressed, have suicidal ideations, being bullied at school, and they had a surgery to change that for him. Would you be okay with it? And the father sits back and the father just starts crying. Mm-hmm. He says, what are we doing? I said, because your son's a boy. He's a boy and he has breasts and he feels like he's trapped in the wrong body. And you'll hear that a lot from this community. I'm born wrong and I'm trapped in the wrong body. And I have changed that narrative, been changing that narrative for years. You know, when you're sitting with a 12-year-old over Zoom, because it was during COVID, quick story. This is really talks about body and what they need. Got a message on my phone one day from a mom. Tony, my son is in the hospital. He tried to commit suicide 3 times since January and twice while inpatient. He has really bad body dysphoria. Oh, my son is 12. 12 years old, 5 suicide attempts. So I get on a Zoom call with this little guy, right? He has a mask on. And I said to him, how you doing? And he says, I'm fine. They all say that. I'm like, you're fine. Let me start over. And I said, welcome to the trans boy, trans guy club, dude. You know, what's going on? What's going on? I heard you have really bad body dysphoria. And he was like, well, what do you expect? I'm trapped in a girl's body. And I said, trapped in a girl's body? You're a freaking guy. What are you talking about? I said, oh, you've been taught there's only 2 types of bodies, girl bodies and boy bodies. Not true. There is girl bodies and boy bodies, but there's trans boy bodies, trans girl bodies, intersex bodies, and non-binary bodies. You, my friend, were born in a trans boy's body just like me. What do you need? You need a binder? Oh, I can get a binder. I said, I have binders. I've been doing a binder drive for 10 years, sending binders to kids and trans adults all over the world. And when I started with Healthcare Advocates, they took that on financially, which I was like, thank you. So fast forward, I get off the call from him. I put two binders in the bag, a self-made man t-shirt and 2 of my books. I run it down to the pediatric psych ward. And if anybody has ever been in a pediatric psych ward or has visited one, it's the saddest place on earth, which is really hard to go into. I dropped off all his stuff. He got out of the hospital 2 weeks later. 2 months after that, he called me and he said, I have an announcement. And I was like, okay, what's up? He goes, I'm planning my future. I think I want to be a social worker or something so I can help kids. Now we saved him. We saved him because we gave him what he needed. Because I really believe, Aaron, that no matter if you're 5 or 95, if you're suffering, you know what you need to feel better.
Yes, of course. And yet, so many of us feel this need to impose our narrative onto other people. Yeah. And I think this is the work that you're doing. This is the work that I'm trying to do, is to just increase the understanding and the compassion that even if we see the world one way, another person, it's their life and they're entitled to feel what they feel and to own who they are, and they're not hurting anyone else. And I really appreciate all these stories, Tony, because it really humanizes it in a way that I think is important right now.
Yeah, but I mean, let's talk reality here. I don't know what it's like to be born in a body that matches my gender identity. I have no idea what it's like to be cisgender at all. But I still honor cisgender people, and I still believe they exist. And when I'm training, right, when I'm training people and I'm talking about this, I say to them, I hear this all the time from cisgender people. How can that be? If you're born a boy, you stay a boy. I can never. What do they mean, both or neither? That makes no sense to me. It will never make sense to you to physically feel like something that you're not. Ever makes sense to you. But if you're going to sit in that space of unacceptance, and instead of saying, okay, there's people that are different than me, and accept, your whole body will shift. You'll be a changed person because you'll be lighter. because you're going to be sending stuff out through your heart space and your soul space. We know this. But I'll never know what it's like to be cisgender, and I still honor you, even though trans people are much cooler. Sorry, it's the truth. We all know that. I just had to say it on the record.
That is such a great point. Like, hey, I don't know what it's like to be you, but I still honor you. It's sort of upending that sense of, my way is the right way. Well, is it really? Just because there's more of you? Maybe not. I love that. I love that so much. The other thing I keep hearing that I would really love your perspective on is and I don't even like saying the phrase, but the whole grooming thing. That, the kids are getting groomed. No. What do you say to that? How do we react to that in a way that's
my knee jerk try to keep everything light reaction is, because I get hate mail, I get death threats for what I do. I'm called you wouldn't believe the stuff that people say to me when they find out that I work with trans kids. If it's somebody coming at me like in a negative way, I say to them, yeah, when I was a lesbian, I turned somebody gay, I got a toaster oven, but now I'm trans and I turned a trans kid, a kid trans, and I get a microwave oven. So why wouldn't I do that, right? Here's the reality of it. The reality of it is, if somebody's grooming anybody, I don't sit with kids and say to them, oh, you're trans. That's not what I do. That's not what we do. Nobody that's working with these kids, what we do is we believe them when they tell us what they need. And we believe them when they say, like I had this one mom, her kid is 5 years old, and has a brother, and the kid was born with the assumed sex of female at birth. And the kid goes up to the mother and says, I'm supposed to have a pee-pee like her brother at the time. And the mother says, no, you're a girl. No, mommy, I'm a boy. God made a mistake when I was in your belly. I'm a boy. Right. So the mother gets on, she doesn't know what to do. And I said, well, what is your child asking for? Right. At the age of 5, they want their hair cut. I said, cut their hair. But how about what? It'll grow. Just cut their hair. Right. She sends me a picture of this kid in a barber chair with a haircut, smiles like up to here. And the kid just shifted. They became more outgoing. So a lot of times, nobody is taking anything off or putting anything on. Anyone that's a young child, what we're doing up until after Tanner stage 2, when the breast buds start developing, that's when blockers are put into place if that child needs it. Okay, it's not want either; it's needed. It's medically necessary. But up until then, it's just a social transition. So what's a social transition? Changing the name and pronoun, changing the way they dress, growing their hair, cutting their hair.
Yeah, can you talk about the pronouns a little bit? Because I think sometimes that's a thing that trips people up too, especially in a certain generation, that you kind of get the eye rolls and, oh, what's the big deal? Like, why can't I just use the words that I know? And so,
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about why that's important?
Yeah, well, it's super important with kids, because with kids, that's the only thing they have control over, is call me Tony and call me he. They don't have control over what their bodies are doing. They don't have control over medical decisions that are being made for them. They have control over nothing. And if we can honor them with their name and pronoun, they feel their transition is moving even at a snail's pace. It's better for them in their mental wellness. Okay. But let's talk about pronouns. I would always challenge people who are cisgender, who don't understand it. Typically, it's people that are cisgender, to say, well, how would you feel if from now on I call you by a different name and pronoun? How would you feel about that? You wouldn't feel seen. You wouldn't feel heard. You wouldn't feel like anybody knows who you are. Pronouns are important to people. And, a lot of times we used to train for years. If say you call me by my dead name or birth name, that's what the kids call their birth name. A lot of people call it their dead name. And I corrected you, we would train people to apologize. Oh my God, I'm sorry, Tony, I'm sorry. We don't train that way anymore. At least I don't. You thank the person. Thank you, Tony, for correcting me. And you move on. What's the difference? Here's the shift. If you're going to apologize to me, you're putting me in the position to make you feel better about what you just did. And I'm going to say it's okay. Right? If you say, thank you for correcting me, I feel seen, heard, and empowered. It's all about, for those of you out there that are like, well, I've been calling my daughter or son or friend or whatever she for the last 10 years, I gotta call them he now. That's hard for me. How am I supposed to do it? It's hard for me. Well, number one, it's not about you, right? And there's a big difference between the need and want energy. When you feel like you need to do something, it's pretty stressful. But when you want to do something, it's not. So if you can shift that to, I want to honor my son or daughter. I want to honor a human. I want to honor this being. It makes it easier. And it's the power of the pause, right? That space between reaction, right? Remember you taught me that, right? And I always, when I train this between stimulation and reaction, this is funny. I just was training a bunch of people at this organization a couple of nights ago. And I said, you see this? I said, how many people were born in an Italian family? How many? I didn't know about this space between stimulation and reaction until I was in my mindfulness class. I didn't know it existed, okay? Because people just react. So take that space because it actually, it actually exists. I swear.
I love all of that. And I love the flipping it around. Even me as a cisgender person, we just assume that I look like a woman, people are going to react to me as a woman. But what if they didn't? What if they started calling me different things? How would I feel? It's such a great question.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever had to worry about what bathroom to use? Have you ever had to worry about somebody like a form that you filled out that there wasn't a space for how you identify? Did you ever have to worry about what like, oh my God, like these poor kids that are in schools, these especially trans and non-binary kids, sometimes they won't eat or drink anything all day. So they won't have to use a bathroom.
Wow.
Because there's a big difference between accepting and affirming, right? Accepting is like, okay, I accept you, I love you. And you don't want to say no matter what, I love you just the way you are, or whatever. But accepting somebody is calling them by the name and pronoun that they choose, giving them access to bathrooms that they feel comfortable using, and so on.
I'm so appreciative of all of this and all of these nuances and personal stories. And I'm just, I'm thinking about how do we shift the collective to make it more compassionate. And I really hope that people will listen to this with an open mind and an open heart, because I'm just thinking of other people hearing these stories and thinking, oh, you're kind of promoting this degeneracy by creating different bathrooms and you're making it easier for them. And it's just really supporting people in who they are and their mental and physical wellness.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if we don't create the bathrooms and do the advocacy and learn and cultivate understanding, we are, if I'm hearing you correctly, just contributing to their suffering and misery in the world, which isn't good for anyone to have more miserable people in the world. No,
and it's sad because, I do not hesitate when a child says to me, I don't want to live anymore. All right. If I can't get them to a safe place, I call 911. And there was quite a few years ago, I got a call from one of the kids in my support group saying, Jamie's going to hang himself. So I called the mother right away. And the mother was like, no. And I said, if you don't get in that room, I'm calling 911. All of a sudden, I hear her screaming. The kid was hanging from a belt, and she cut him down. I go to visit. Now, here was the problem in this household. The parents weren't on board. They wouldn't call Jamie he and him. I mean, it was keeping his birth name. Birth name could be used for male or female, but they thought he had mental illness, that they didn't believe that he was trans. So I go to the hospital to see him, and nothing really scares me, but the black and blues around this kid's neck. And he says this to me. I got to say something. I wish I could have done this with my hands tied behind my back. If I can only have done that, because when I couldn't breathe, I went like that. And if I could have tied my hands behind my back, Tony, I would have died, and that's what I really want. Of course, I had to sit down and talk to the doctors at the hospital because what he just said. But, with coaching and love and compassion, and I talked to the parents got on board, they gave him his top surgery, and he's living a happy life now. It's really something, because I've been doing these groups for almost 16 years. So the kids that were like 15 are now 31 years old, and they're teachers, and it's just such a wonderful thing to see them, that they're still alive, that when they used to come to me, they were so beaten, They were never broken, but they were certainly beaten down by people who were trying to tell them how to think and who they are. Listen, if I listened to everybody who told me they knew me better than I knew myself, I'd be an Italian woman cooking pasta for my 3 kids every Sunday. I mean, honestly, right? That's the truth. That's the truth. Could you imagine that? I can't imagine that.
No.
So in all reality, I wouldn't be here. I actually would have ended my life for sure. But we can't. That's like in taking steps to becoming the person I am. I do this workshop called Beyond the Binary, a journey to self-love and acceptance, right? How did I get from cutting myself in the woods every day to who I am today? Well, I had to stop listening to people who told me that they knew me better than I knew myself. That was the first thing.
So there's a lot of people out there, unfortunately, who think they know these kids better than they know themselves. And so what advice do you have? Are there any, you've worked with a lot of people who are resistant to all of this. Are there any kind of nuggets of wisdom that you can offer to the people who are, let's say, on the other side or not an ally?
If you're not an ally and you don't know so if you're a parent who is having difficulty, that's one thing. If you're a parent out there that's having difficulty, you can contact me. Okay. And I will definitely, with loving kindness, guide you. If you're somebody who's just sitting in a house or sitting in a political seat that has, and you don't know any trans people, you're just saying you have to do better, and shame on you. Shame on you. Because if you're going to be pushing these agendas because you don't even know the community, they don't know who we are. They think listen, there's a big misconception that all trans people struggle with mental illness. Yeah, some of us do, just like people in every community struggle with mental illness. And there was a trans woman said this at a conference once: being trans doesn't mean you're crazy, but being trans can make you crazy. So what are they hoping for? I don't understand it. I don't understand how these politicians can create laws in some of these states that if a health provider is supporting a young, under 18, trans or non-binary person, it's illegal. It's illegal. They can get arrested. And if parents are supporting their children, it's child abuse and their children will be taken away from them. Connecticut announced probably 4 months ago now that we are a safe haven, not only for abortion, but a safe haven for gender affirming care.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So we got like 2 families fleeing Texas because they're getting investigated.
Wow.
When did we get into people's homes? How can you deny a parent for doing the best thing they can do for their kids? You know, I just created a video that's going to go public probably in a couple of weeks. And I interviewed a kid who I met the first time, FaceTiming him from a gurney in the psych ward emergency room at Yale. Okay. This kid was in and out of that hospital more than you know. And his mother says, after talking with Tony, he changed like this. So what did I say to him? I said to him, he gave me a little background. I said, seems like you're always in that hospital around your Shark Week. Shark Week is what trans boys call their period. Okay, sure. He says, yeah. I said, you know, we can stop that, right? What? I said, yeah, dude, we can stop it. You know, just let me hook you up with a gender clinic. They can stop that. You don't have to suffer anymore. You don't have to suffer anymore. Sorry, I'm getting emotional because they're suffering. They're suffering. And it's the saddest thing when you see a kid that the only thing they need is for somebody to say, I believe you. I believe you. All right. A lot of people say, like, what do you say when kids are crying in front of you? How do you do it? I'll tell you what I do. I never say to them, don't cry. It's going to be okay. I don't. I sit there. Remember when I was at the beach and I said, I want people to feel like smile just by feeling my energy? When a kid is sobbing in front of me, I sit there in silence and I give them love and kindness through my energy. And I sit there and I'm a calming force for them. And when I'm able to say something, I say something like this: I'm sorry you're suffering. I'm here for you. What do you need? And when they tell me what they need, I believe them. I believe them. Some adults don't believe them. They hold kids to their agenda, right? Like, how can they need that? That doesn't make any sense. A binder. How can a binder save them? Well, binders save a lot of people. It brings me to tears because What's scary is, as passionate as I am for advocating for these kids, they're just as passionate about advocating against these kids.
I know. That's the shocking piece about where we are.
Yeah, for sure.
And what you said is just so important, Tony, and it shows how we can evolve as humans. And I'm guessing you came out as already kind of wise and compassionate, but wisdom and compassion are qualities that can be developed through certain contemplative practices. So
Absolutely.
if you're somebody out there in that other camp of, well, I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like it's rocking their world and they're feeling like they have to double down on whatever. Maybe go do some loving kindness practices. Maybe, because it really can make a difference in terms of how we show up. And I'm not sure we're going to get out of this just from our heads and trying to give people facts and whatever. It's like, okay, can we come into our hearts? Stop, pause, as you said. Let's just come into our hearts. What are we doing and why? And how can we be more compassionate? How? And those practices can really make a difference.
Absolutely. It's like, this is what happened. Trans rights have been really growing. When I transitioned in 2005, there wasn't anybody supporting anybody. Even in Connecticut, in 2011, they added gender identity and expression to our anti-discrimination bill, which was huge, right? But, they have nobody else to pick on, because trans rights are going up that mountain almost equal to everybody else's rights. And they're like, oh, shit, we got to stop that. And what do they pick on? They pick on the kids, the most vulnerable of our community. Sit with kids that are suffering. I'm working with a 17-year-old, started working with him about a year ago, nonverbal when I met him, okay? And the school, he goes to a special school, they said, hey, we got a nonverbal kid. He Googled trans and self-harm. I came up on a video, and the woman was like, he came in my office, he's nonverbal, Tony, and talked about you for 45 minutes. So I met this guy, went to the school, met him, and I said, it's nice meeting you. And he whispered, you helped me when I was in the hospital 2 years ago. And I remember this kid, because in COVID, they had to wear masks. I mean, I couldn't go in there, so I had to Zoom with the kids in psych hospitals. And he didn't say anything for 45 minutes, but I'm an empowerment coach. I'm empowering him. 3 days later, he ends up in the hospital, suicidal ideations. So now I can go back up to the hospital. So I go up to Liberty Street Hospital in New Haven, and he's sitting there curled up in a ball in a chair, and heartbreaking. Now he lives with his great-grandparents because his parents and his grandparents have beaten him and sexually abused him. This kid had awful things happening to him. So I said to him, and I'll be honest what I said. I said, hey, what's going on? How are you? I'm okay. They always say that. And I said, Ted, look where you are. And he was like, I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to live anymore. And I said, well, you know what? I want you to live because I love you. I care about you. And if I have to be out in this world, you got to be out here in this world with me. And he started smiling. But I said to him, dude, here's the deal. Take your effing power back. Take your power back. You have your power has been taken from you by so many people. Take your power back. I got your back. We're going to go through this journey. You're not alone anymore. I am here. I'm not going anywhere. Of course, this kid thinks I'm going to not be committed to him because nobody else was in his life. So the great-grandmother calls me 2 days later and says, excuse me, but what did you say to him? And I said, oh boy, here we go. Because sometimes, I get in trouble.
No.
And I said, what's going on? She says, I get a phone call. There was a voice on the other end that said, can I get my hair cut when I get out of here? She's like, who's this? And he was like, Ted, really? Hey, listen, Tony told me to take my power back. Okay. Can I get my hair cut? So now let's fast forward. He's hooked up. Now he's on testosterone. He's getting his top surgery in December. And a month ago, he called me up I talk to him almost every day, but this was special. Calls me up on a Saturday and says this. I won't keep you because I know it's a Saturday, but I just thought you might want to know that I think I'm starting to love myself.
Oh, my goodness.
I just started bawling my eyes out. So how did he get from being nonverbal, curled up in a psych hospital, to now feeling like he's loving himself? What's the magic potion? We allowed him to be who he knows he is. Period.
I mean, that kind of says it all.
Yeah.
Let him be.
He's a good kid too. He's a sweet. He has, and they all, even though they're suffering, once they kind of start coming out of it, they want to help. How can I help other kids? How can I help other kids? You know?
So even if you're somebody listening to this, watching this, who doesn't quite get it, who still thinks the world should be this way, maybe after listening to everything that Tony has said, just show up, even if it doesn't make sense to you on some level, even if you can't understand what it would feel like, or to just show up, compassion first, empathy first. Like, okay, it doesn't have to make sense to you, right? It doesn't have to, be something you would choose for yourself or your family. It's not a choice anyway, but just open your heart a tiny bit. And instead of judging or imposing your particular worldview on another person, and even if you're not to the point where you can support, maybe just say nothing. Maybe that's better than some of the things that are happening right now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, listen, there's a lot of things that cisgender people don't understand about other cisgender people. Like, a lot of people don't like tattoos. I mean, I would never get a tattoo. How can somebody else get it? You don't hate that person. You don't try to stop. You don't try to close every tattoo shop in your state. I mean, I know it's not the same, but it's almost the same. Like, you're not going to understand. Don't try to understand that you are retired. I'm trying to understand what it's like to be trans if you're not trans. Happy retirement.
That's such a great example with the tattoos. I really do think it is.
I mean, not for nothing, but you know me.
Yeah, and you could choose to not get one for yourself. It's the same with abortion. I could hypothetically choose to never get one, but it doesn't mean I want to get out there and tell everyone else what they should do with their bodies or their lives. So Tony, this is such an important conversation. I'm so appreciative of you and your time. Is there anything you want to leave people with?
I just want to remind everybody that, kindness has a boomerang effect, right? So when you're kinder to yourself, you're kinder to others. And when you're kinder to others, you're kinder to yourself. Kindness is free, doesn't cut into anybody's budgets, okay? And it really makes you feel better. Be that person that just says to somebody, I believe you. I believe you. And it's cool. I mean, listen, you don't have to have trans people as best friends or non-binary people as best friends, but certainly have it in your heart to look at a community who is really being attacked right now. Listen, a lot of people forget that I'm trans. Sometimes I forget that I'm trans. Okay. And I'm scared about what's happening in this country. All right. And I've worked too hard to find my inner peace. I don't want anything else to shade over it anymore. So just be kind to every being, and you're going to feel so much better. And so am I.
Well put, my friend. And if people need you as an advocate or want to have you come as a speaker or a trainer or as a coach, I know they can Google and find you, but is that the best way, through your website?
Yeah, and my website is tonyferraiolo.com, so it's pretty easy. Or you can email me, tony@tonyferraiolo.com.
Wonderful. And so anyone, if you've watched this to the end, if you've listened, have a friend who is trans. Yes. And so get out there, be an advocate for compassion and bodily sovereignty in the world. So thank you for everything that you're doing, Tony, for who you are. It's really a privilege to know you and cheering you on.
Oh, it was my honor being here with you, Erin. Thank you.
Thank you.